Hey everyone, Pastor Tim here coming to you from Community of Grace Lutheran Church in Peoria, Arizona with the greatest news ever. It transformed the world and continues to transform lives today. Jesus Christ is risen, and he is risen indeed. Welcome to our Easter service, and today we are going to talk about a surprising, joyous turn that took place 2,000 years ago and how that can change your life. And so we celebrate together with the good news that Jesus Christ is risen today. So I want to start you out with a little quiz today. And here's how the quiz is going to work. I want to read for you a couple opening lines from a book. And I want to see if you can guess the name of the book and the name of the author based on these opening lines. All right, so here's the first one to give you a sense of how it's going to work. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Private Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. Anybody? You are absolutely correct. I heard that all over the place. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, J.K. Rowling. All right, next one. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. All right, well, that's a little bit of a clue, don't you think? The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. Next one. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of air raids. If you're a C.S. Lewis fan, then you got this one right away. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay? Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. All right? How about this one? That was Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief by Riordan. Now, one more. This is going to be a little tougher. Toby Baxter sighed. Then he yawned. Toby Baxter hated reading books. Anybody? Well, 6 of you probably know the answer to this. It's all my family members. This is The Adventures of Toby Baxter, The River Elf, The Giant in the Closet, written by me. All right. Now, all of these books, and many like them, have some things in common. First of all of these books are fantasy adventures. All of these books are fantasy adventures written to a target audience of middle school age readers, although younger readers and older and even much older readers enjoy these books. The heroes and the heroines in these books tend to be about the same age as the target audience. And with the exception of The Adventures of Toby Baxter, so far anyway, all of these books have been made into major Hollywood blockbuster films. But they also share something deeper, something that J.R.R. Tolkien calls Eucatastrophe. Now, Eucatastrophe probably isn't a word that you use in your everyday conversations. In fact, I think it's a word that Tolkien himself coined. But for Tolkien, Eucatastrophe means good catastrophe. Now, that sounds like an oxymoron, and so he explains further. He says a eucatastrophe is a story with a surprising, joyous turn. Now, the surprising, joyous turn is more than just a happy ending. It's much deeper than that. Because all of these stories deal honestly and openly with what he calls discatastrophes. Now, a discatastrophe focuses on the challenges of life, the tough stuff of life, and we all go through them. Suffering, hardship, confusion, failure, brokenness, death. All of these stories take discatastrophes very, very seriously, but then in the middle of the discatastrophe, a turn takes place. Surprisingly, grace shows up. Hope shows up. Joy shows up. Life shows up. A resounding yes shows up. Eucatastrophe shows up in the midst of discatastrophe. a joyous turn takes place. Now, Tolkien tells us that we resonate with stories like these for a couple reasons. First of all, because deep down inside of us, we have this primal need for eucatastrophe in our lives. We go through these discatastrophes. We go through pain or hardship or loss or grief. And there's something about the depths of our humanity that cries out for grace, for hope, for life to break in. And we also resonate with these stories because, as Tolkien reminds us, these stories point us to the one true Eucatastrophe. And that's the event and the story of Easter. Now, the story of Easter, the event of Easter, is a deeply human story. It's a story filled with twists and turns, much like our lives. In this story, at a very particular moment in time, 2,000 years ago, God, the creator of the universe, entered into human history in the person of Jesus. And when we start the story of Jesus, it starts out with expectation and hope, much like our stories. But then, life gets in the way. We expect Jesus to be a conquering hero. He ends up on a cross as a condemned criminal. We expect Jesus to deal in the currency of victory, but he ends up the victim of suffering and pain and death. The story of Easter is a story that begins shrouded in discatastrophes. It's a very human story because Jesus goes through what we go through: grief, sorrow, hardship, suffering, even death. But then, a joyous turn takes place. Something nobody expected 2,000 years ago, something that we still have a hard time getting our brains around in the 21st century. God broke into the discatastrophe of Good Friday with the Eucatastrophe, the good catastrophe of Easter. God showed up at that tomb, and life and hope and grace and yes were the resounding words, and Jesus walked out of that grave alive. The story of Easter is the story of your Creator breaking into the discatastrophes of your life with a surprising, joyous turn, the turn of hope and grace and life, evidenced through the death and resurrection of Jesus. Now, admittedly, the story of Easter sounds too good to be true. But the reality, the story of Easter is so good, it is true, and it is so true, it is good. And it's a good, true story for you. Because God is still alive and well in the 21st century, and God, through the death and resurrection of Jesus, comes to you today into the midst of your discatastrophes, the pain, the hardship, the frustrations, the disappointments, the grief, the sorrow. God comes to you in the person of Jesus to speak a word of eucatastrophe to you, to speak good catastrophe to you right now. Because right now in this moment, through Jesus, he speaks life to you. He speaks grace to you. He speaks joy to you. He speaks yes to you. Easter is a moment that can change your life when God comes to you with that sudden joyous turn and says, "You are mine, I am with you," and life will have the final word. May God's eucatastrophe of Jesus meet you today and bring you grace.